Double Primer is back-to-back conversations with someone passionate about their work and passionate about someone else's work. Mostly art and mostly Atlanta. I'm your host, Sean Mills.
For instance, the popular example that I like is the idea that fast food places, they make you feel like things are infinite. It's the feeling like they could be infinite Big Macs back there, when in actuality you know that, there's probably only 50 or in like life and websites like Hyperreality is kind of like a buzzword for our time because, you have like infinite scrolling on your apps and you have, it's something like tapping and touching the infinite has like been more real now than ever it has been in the past. You ever touched Hyperreality?
And when you were saying fast food, I was thinking more of like unlimited refills in the soda machine.
Oh yeah, definitely.
When you mentioned that, it's like, oh yeah, I guess there's this sense that you can get as much as you want. Although lately, now as I'm getting older, maybe I don't know if it's getting more mature or whatever, I'm not interested. Like I'm like, I don't want a bucket of soda, right? I want a small soda to get a little bit of the flavor and whatever, the enjoyment you get from a soda, but sort of leave it at a reasonable size that isn't, maybe I'm thinking more about my health as well, right?
Totally. And like that's the like anxiety that comes out of it. The plenty, you feel responsible to drink as much as you can because you have the option to.
Right, or to get your money's worth, right, or something.
We're suffering from the disease of hyperreality a little bit.
The obesity epidemic.
Right, that could be part of it. Welcome to Double Primer episode 35. I'm your host, Sean, joined by Tanju as usual. So what's trending for you this week?
All right, so what's trending? The one I want to talk about today specifically came up on Sunday. That caught my eye, and this is something I've actually been curious about. And Sean, you having an art background, I'm hoping we can talk a little bit more about it. But there was actually in the Twitter moments, there was some design museum in England or Europe had electronic fonts for a hashtag Font Sunday is what it was called. And the design museum is the European Museum of Contemporary Design. And they basically, they curate the Font Sunday hashtag on Sundays, apparently. And that particular one, this past Sunday, we're featuring some artist that I have no idea who it was. I'm looking for it, and I lost it while I was talking. But electronic fonts in particular, they were asking people essentially to post examples of electronic fonts. So I just found the tweet now. It's February 24th. Today's Font Sunday is hosted by David Reinfurt, at David Reinfurt, who developed the speech-to-text font for Sir David Edijay's proposed Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King Memorial in Boston. The theme is electronic display fonts. Share your examples. So I wasn't following Design's Museum. I was essentially just the Twitter moments, which has a lot of electronic fonts, different people posting, right? Like the E.T. video game from Atari 1982, some old computer displays, artistic displays, LEDs, airport, which I just thought was kind of cool. And I have this like very naive passing interest in typography a little bit. I've never actually studied it, but I've seen books highlighting typography, and I think even you, before we started doing the podcast, at one point recommended what was it, like a hacker cookbook for designers or something like that, right? As one of the Humble Bundle books. Yep. You remember that? And they definitely had, I think, a couple chapters on typography as well, which is probably the most I've ever actually read about what typography is, but just kind of being a foundational sort of graphic design concept in the arts, graphic design arts. Am I on the right track there, or is that something you've ever studied yourself formally?
Yeah, well, you said like this is focusing specifically on digital fonts, right?
Yes.
And what's interesting about that is you say to yourself, the first question is, well, how is that different from traditional fonts? And so that's kind of an interesting transition, but we're always like beholden to like the previous generation's technological deficit. And so when we talk about electronic fonts versus regular fonts, the thing is you can do different things on screens than you can do on print. Lots of type programs like Microsoft Word, like they've changed over the years. So like it used to be serif fonts were the standard, like Times New Roman, and it's sort of slowly turned into Arial as the standard. So like the serif embellishment has kind of, it had a specific purpose for legibility when people write, and when the computer's generating the image, the less pixels to generate the same amount of information is like the more efficient way. So sometimes when like design innovation becomes design de-evolution or like anti-design, those fonts can sometimes do like incredibly complex things that you would like it would be way too laborious. So like I think about, I don't know if your kids do this, but sometimes like kids will have like custom fonts on their phone. So like I would never in a million years do this, but like sometimes teenage girls will have like these really flowery fonts that they have like as the native text on their phone. And sometimes like the only time that comes up is if they screen cap their phone and you're like, whoa, why is that flowery font? You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, that's funny. I have no idea. My kids, I don't know if we're particularly liberal with our kids and their phone and kind of respect their privacy with it. So I don't, he actually got me curious now to see if I might be able to spy on their phone a little just to get a sense of as like a design.
Yeah, experiment.
From a design experiment or curiosity, not trying to pry into their private lives there. See how that goes when I ask about it.
It's hard to be kind of a dabbler. Like you're either like fully into it and you can recognize Gothic at a distance, or you don't, right?
That's interesting. So that just brings it back to, so my dad's got really good handwriting and was like really anal about handwriting and would sort of scold me about it to the extent that I'd sort of pay attention to him. But I remember when I was a kid, young kid, fourth grade, for one of my birthdays, I got a calligraphy pen kit, which I think most fourth graders, even in the late 80s or early 90s, whenever that was, would not be excited about a present like that. It wasn't the only thing I got, luckily, but I it was like a fountain pen style with cartridges, right? Where you got to break the cartridge in the nib, and it had 3 or 4 different nibs of different widths. And I was excited about that thing. I practiced sort of self on my own for a year or some amount of time, just kind of in a dabbling mode about it, but was definitely interested in that. And exactly to your point, I think sort of learned the 26 characters and whatever the little guidebook that came with the kit, font style it had, right? And then just moved on to other things. Really didn't pursue it in any real way.
Yeah.
But I think that also may be why I've always sort of had a passing curiosity about fonts and typography in general. So cool. Yeah, that's what's trending. Hashtag Font Sunday. You might be checking it out if you're interested in as well. Moving on to the next topic here. Your week this week is what you're working on?
So I'm actually kind of taking inspiration from you, because in previous weeks I kind of had been doing the thing of going back to previous works and discussing origins, and now I'm going to kind of talk about what I'm doing in media res, what I'm doing in this moment without tap dancing anymore. Basically, I'm working on this project for a show that the Maker Station is going to be part of in May the 4th.
Oh, yeah, cool.
So that project, just for people who haven't heard about it yet or might be interested, is basically, it's a pretty open theme, but it's basically kind of geared towards nerd or geek kind of popular culture things. The idea of having artwork for a community of non-connoisseurs is really important to me. I think it's a lot of negative momentum for kids and for the general public to be well, I don't know about that world. Even when it's a community center, even when it's specifically programmed for you, there can be a lot of tension about that. So that's why I feel like it'll be kind of a cool project to be a part of.
That's cool to hear you're already started working on it, because I have it on my to-do list, and there's a slowly, as time moves forward, an increasing amount of anxiety that I'm starting to I gotta start I got to start getting that together. Like, I'm one of the main organizers. Jessie, the main organizer, she started planning it last year, right? Towards the end of the year, as she plans out her sort of annual schedule, which I was like, ooh, that's way too early. Like, well, I'll agree to anything at this point in time,
Right.
Which I don't think she necessarily wanted to hear that either sometimes. But so do you want to tell us a little bit about
Doing like a series of portraits of Lego minifigures, like kind of like portraits, because Legos, as we've discussed in the past, was kind of like, that's a classic kind of nerd maker kind of toy that is everyone can relate to.
They call that. It's almost like the gateway drug. Yeah, the Legos they're pretty timeless now. By now, I guess they managed to survive the 2000s and the late 90s. I think they had a hard time as a company there for a little while.
Then, like, they're really booming now with these movie licensing tie-ins, like, because it's like for the collectors, it's like, oh, I need the Harry Potter Lego, I need the Death Star Lego.
I think that's what saved the company. Actually, was that finding that's winning formula, I guess, right? That was repeatable. And they could bank on it, essentially.
For sure. And so what I find it useful as a concept because there's a little bit of a phobia for me of dealing with pop culture media and painting it.
Oh, really?
That it's like, and I'll kind of get into the weeds with that in a second, but I was going to say, starting by the solution, which is, if I have this Lego object, I can manipulate that object as a sculptural object and then paint that object so it feels a little less cheating, shall we say, than if you just like reproduce a ready-made graphic design image made for a movie or something, right? That's a little derivative. So it affords me this option to say, like, I'm having my input on this object. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like your interpretation, you're able to put your interpretation of that object in a way that has some artistic merit.
Sure.
Maybe.
Yeah. Like that I'm bringing something to the table, and then also there's like there's that extra layer that like we were just talking about, that the Lego toy is being joined with these franchises. So like that's like an entry point to the franchises. So like my first kind of attempt was that I painted a Lego Batman, and specifically the Lego Batman where he has like a fire suit from a video game, so that it's like there's a specificity to it. And
so actually, that's so cool. So I saw that. I saw you posted that on Instagram, or I don't know if that's the finished work or that's a work in progress.
It's
right, the red Lego minifig, but like Instagram, I didn't really scrutinize it too deep, so I just saw that, thought like, oh, that looks kind of cool, and it's kind of cool to hear that it's part of this bigger project. Actually, I think that's pretty.
So like the plan too is that like I'm gonna like maybe make like at least 4 of these and then connect them into like a block of paintings, which is something that we've discussed and at the Maker Station, which is like, and so like that's another layer there, that it's like it's a block and Legos are blocks, so it's like thematically joined.
Very cool. Yeah, that project's a little bit stalled out, right? We had a little bit of momentum talking through that, and then got distracted.
And I almost see it as like, in terms of making that, it's almost like if you have a print-ready file, it's just a matter of going to the printer. Like the hard, like for some people that would be like, well, the printer's the real part, but for me, I kind of think of it as like, well, kind of figuring out how it would work is the hardest part, and it's only a matter of like, if I just said, hey Mike, could you meet me this Saturday? I'm sure we could like physically print 4 things.
Right. That's so funny. So I experienced a little bit of that. I'm starting to experience a little bit of that with these hangboards, right? So I debuted the hangboard at the competition on Saturday. Got a ton of really positive feedback. Several people like very curious, like, oh, how are you making this? And you're carving it on CNC. And I was like, yeah, you get the design and then the CNC carves it. And they're like, oh, it's that easy. Like they just, and I didn't want to get into a deep conversation with them, but sort of like, oh, designing it to make it ready for the CNC, the printer essentially, like, is actually a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot of work, and I'm designing it electronically. This is the other thing, is like, this very mix of, you're doing the electronic design for something tangible that needs to be scaled, like human scale to like human hands, right? So I use my hands as the reference of the size, and I have no idea are my hands average or not. But at this point in time, I am perfectly, I'm not driven so much. I mean, there's artistic drive going on, but there's no like purity of art for me, right? So if somebody wanted a Daffy Duck, and if I could do it, I would be happy to do that. But what I am getting, I got a few offhand comments. It's like, oh, we could put logos of one of the things I'm envisioning is like rock gyms might be interested in buying these, where you can have the rock gym logo and there's, on there. But the people making these very naive comments of like, oh, you can just design whatever you want. You can put it on there and knock it out and you're good to go. And it's like, well, yes and no, right? Because it's got to fit certain constraints that match like the human, the anatomy of your hands and the ability to hold weight as well, right? So you can't have super thin ligaments, or, the cutting bit has a certain diameter to it. So the bigger diameter that you use, the faster you're going to be able to remove material. But then it's like a brush stroke. What do they call that? Coarse brush strokes versus fine brush strokes, right? So
right.
You lose a lot of resolution.
Sure.
And if you want the higher resolution, you need a smaller bit, but now you've increased your cut time by a factor of 2 or more, right? Which can be painful and essentially expensive. And then it becomes costly. With time being money sort of scenario. So,
for sure.
Yeah, those are things I'm going to be, I think, tackling as we move forward, and depending on how popular they get or how much interest people are in terms of willing to actually spend money on them, right? Versus just noodling on ideas.
Well, without getting too much into that, I was curious, did your winner like kind of get it?
Yeah.
The one who won the raffle?
Yeah, it was really cool. That was a cool experience in that the winner it was a couple. It was a woman that won it, but it was a couple that are pretty prolific climbers. The guy actually has a pretty lively Instagram account called Nestor Heel Hooks. At Nestor Heel Hooks is his Instagram. And somehow they had come across like whatever I'd been posting. So they at least had a concept of it. And then, I think it's not Maureen, what's her name? Miriam, like came up to me after the event. She's like, I'd been on space like, oh, I really like that. I really hope I win it. That's such a cool idea. She mentioned she made a point to tell me that she liked it and was hoping that she won. And, I ended up having to leave before the actual raffle got pulled, but it turned out that she won. And I don't know if these were big raffle table. You can buy as many tickets as you want, and then you drop your tickets into the cups of the prizes that you're interested in. So they had all sorts of rock climbing paraphernalia, right? Like North Face fleeces, rock climbing ropes, backpacks, and all sorts of stuff. So you could, if you really like something, buy 20 raffle tickets and just dump all 20 into the cup and increase your chances by, compared to the people that might just put one or two tickets in there. So I'm not sure what exactly she did there for that, but she won it, which was pretty cool. And we got like a really nice picture of her, like very excitedly holding it up as she's claiming her prize, which is cool.
Yeah, and so like you can't predict that, but you kind of won the lottery as much as she did, because she's like eager and she's probably happy to like tag you or be testimonials.
I'm really waiting to hear their feedback too. It's like, yeah, please let me know what you like or don't like about this, or if you want to do a different design, right? She actually mentioned they had just bought a house very recently or moving in, so this is going to be part of their new addition to their house, which I thought was a nice story. Right. So we'll see. I haven't heard from her this week, but it's only been a few days.
I actually had a similar kind of predicament, if you want to call it that, where I had brought a handmade painting to give away, like as like we were doing like a white elephant gift exchange. Have you ever had to do one of those?
Absolutely.
And so I was thinking, well, it's going to be one of my coworkers, so I'll be happy to, like, anyone that I've worked with, they'll be a good person to, like, be a steward of my work, and I would appreciate that they probably wouldn't throw it away or whatever, right? And then, which, like, I don't want to sound like a villain, but it was like at the last minute they're like, oh, and we're going to include like the support staff, like janitors and different people who I didn't have a relationship with it. And so, like, someone who I didn't know had like won my painting, and I was like a little bit like having a little anxiety about it. But then luckily it had there's that mechanic of like you can steal something X number of times. I don't know if you've played the game, but basically it's like you open a present, and then if you don't want yours, you can kind of trade with the last person. So it ended up going to someone who I knew and liked it, and it also well that ends well. But I had like a little bit of a Seinfeld-esque like a pang of anxiety.
That'd be like George. Well, no, I guess all the Seinfeld characters had anxiety though at different levels, right? George.
Right, or it's like a scheme of some sort.
Yeah. Man, that's funny. That reminds me, that was like 4 or 5 years ago at work, White Elephant. I had just made a major career change from mechanical, like engineering, like traditional physics-based engineering, over to the IT organization. And the IT group had a White Elephant exchange, which was something kind of new for me at work anyways. And that was the time when I had just barely built my 3D printer, so I was super excited about 3D printing. And I 3D printed a little Christmas ornament. It was actually a little Christmas tree. Made it 2 colors, like very experimental. So I decided to turn that in. But 3D printing, I don't know how much you've actually put your hands on them, but they still look kind of weird a little bit. And you can see the striations and the layers, and they're not quite perfect. So it was this kind of geometric tree. I thought it was really neat. I put a little tag on it. It was also printed out of PLA plastic, which is biodegradable, which I thought was really cool. So I made a little hang tag, like 3D printed ornament made out of biodegradable plastic, whatever. And then the person that won it was this HR woman, and she just like I didn't tell her, we didn't have our names on it. So I just sort of watched her quietly to see how she reacted. Like, I was like, what is, like, disappointed. Like, what is this? Like, what? And then it says like biodegradable plastic. Like it's just trash. She didn't say it was trash, but that was her demeanor about the whole thing. Like, it was, I'm sure it went into the trash, or I don't remember if she traded it, or I think in that one we didn't trade that in that particular event. It was like you just got what you got. And that was very eye-opening for me. Like, oh, not everyone in the world thinks 3D printing is cool.
That's brutal too, because like in that context, sometimes people bring like kind of gag gifts, like, oh, you got the donkey, like you got the bad one. And so she used her like untrained eye to see what you made in sincerity as like a losing proposition.
Yeah, exactly. That was that one stung quite a bit.
Yeah,
but it is what it is.
Sure. Well, so I always like try to thematically have like a purpose to my like cold opens.
Oh, right.
I was talking about like the kind of theoretical cultural proposition of hyperreality. And the reason I bring that up is because there was a really famous article by an art critic who are one of these people that make these kind of grand sweeping social observations, right? So there was this author named Clement Greenberg who wrote a famous article, the avant-garde and kitsch. Do any of those words or names kind of ring a bell at all?
Avant-garde and quiche, yeah. Is it kitsch or quiche? I don't know.
Yeah, I pronounce it kitsch, but like, I'm not. So the concept behind his article was that it was like he was drawing a line in the sand saying that, okay, in the history of image making, history of art, it had been more and more codified by the academy. So it was like, this is how you paint. This is what are the things that are worth painting. And then we ran up into history, into industrial revolution and industrial design, and then all of a sudden we were getting this outpouring of what he calls kitsch, which is, these kind of like disposable, kind of trashy objects, like maybe like, to go back to my favorite again, like Happy Meal toys, say, is like a great kind of like version of that. So if you collect Happy Meal toys knowingly liking that they're kind of trashy, right? Like that's almost part of the relationship, is that it's like it's kind of fun or kooky or, whatever emotional description you want to attach to it, but it's that it's like we know it's mass produced, not bespoke. We know that it's for a populist taste, not for a specified taste, and we know that it's sometimes associated with like for kids, right? So basically, Greenberg was saying that like the kitsch is something that is not art, or it's not the art we should care about, and that the avant-garde is a new thing in modern world that is trying to combat the kitsch that is overwhelming culture. So like that, like conceptual art and art that is maybe experiential, like big color fields that you have to physically experience them in space. These were like a reaction to kitsch. So it was controversial, and that's part of what it's useful about it, is that it's sort of like it was a line in the sand, and then people had equal utility saying that's not true or saying yes, it is true. But either way, it was a shorthand where you could say like, oh, of course Greenberg said this, or you could say, of course Greenberg was debunked about this. But it was like a cultural touchstone, this essay, right? I am this kind of grandfathered in element where the people that taught me still kind of had that feeling of like there's kitsch and you don't want to get involved with that. So like an example would be that I had a professor who he cautioned me that there was a cautionary tale of an artist in New York who was a struggling artist, was, typically didn't have food to eat, waiting for his stock to rise, and he had resorted to painting these like paintings of clowns like on the street corner for like whatever tourists would buy them for, right?
Yeah.
It gave him just enough money to buy his McDonald's and survive, and then he got picked up by a gallery. But then when he tried to show his work, his clown paintings were destroying his market, because the people that want to invest, like to pay $1,000 for a painting, they don't want to know that like some schmo in Minnesota has one of your clown paintings for only $20. So it was destroying his market.
Yeah.
Right? So that was like a tangible example of like why you don't want to indulge in kitsch. You want to preserve your brand, for lack of a better word. But now, so flash forward to now, and there are kids, literally kids, like your son probably's age, who have like a Twitch channel where they'll draw like Sonic the Hedgehog, right? And they might make more in one night, like from donations of just watching him draw Sonic the Hedgehog, than I do in a year. This is a kind of very like cyberpunk, postmodern like art model that Clement Greenberg couldn't have imagined, right? So I kind of think we're in like a post-kitsch era where like those types of fears, maybe founded in like tradition and financial security, they don't really hold the same sway that they used to. So when you look at my website, if you see a bunch of video game characters on there, that'd be a real big turnoff for like the traditional galleries in Atlanta, right? So I keep that world separate because I still have like a little bit of anxiety about this. So like if I send like a person in a suit to my website, they'll be like, oh, okay, I get it. I get this guy, and he makes sense to me, and I digest him the way he's supposed to be digested. Meanwhile, on my social media, my Instagram, it's kind of like a Wild West, come as you are, like free for all, where I can post like Lego guys and not feel any pain, and maybe even have a different type of popularity from it. And so it's kind of like, I'm going to tie it back into you where we have joined into the marriage of a joined social media account. And so like I'm seeing on my phone real-time updates where like if you like a webcomic.
Yeah.
I'm seeing
It's
that.
like a couple of days, yesterday and the day before, right? So is that something, so I don't know if we should discuss this now or offline. Like, is that something you wanted
No,
to keep,
it's cool to talk about.
keep that account to be a little more serious? Because I did think like, oh, we talked about these webcomics. We might as well start following them, right?
Yeah.
But
No, like, so my point wasn't that we should be scared. My point was that we have this kind of hyper-real digital schizophrenia, right? Where, like, you have Tanju as an individual, like a professional, and then you have your artisan climbing identity, and then you have this shared double primer identity, and this is another weird twist that people could fact check themselves, was that I theorized a time in the future when I would want to have people go to the Instagram for double primer. So I purposely kept that like clean and I didn't use it. And my like personal account is double underscore primer.
Okay.
So it's like I'm kind of squatting myself for a future hypothetical concept. But like, so it's I think someone could find it interesting from a certain distance in the future, the idea that like we're running around with 18 different names, 18 different ways that people can engage with you, and when they talk to you through a certain channel, like you might even speak different ways. You might be more casual, you might be more inclined to curse or not curse, you might be more inclined to be professional, right? So all that is to say that so this show coming up, I'm facing my fears and saying like, I'm not going to be scared to be indulging in kitsch. I'm going to try to do my best to participate in as like a authentic and sincere effort, and not kind of pretend like, oh, this is my side stuff, right? I think that's like a easy trap to fall into, to say that it's like, oh, I'm not really trying. This is just something I'm just doing them a favor, or like however you wanted to frame it, right?
I was thinking too, when you're talking about trying to managing your presence there and how it's perceived. It's like, that's like a lot of work, right, for one individual to take on themselves. It almost detracts from like your primary work. And we all have to wear many hats in a lot of what we do, but you know, in a bigger company, definitely in a corporation, that's like the work of a department that's sort of tasked with worrying and thinking about, you know, these concerns that you're raising, that you're having to manage on your own, essentially, I think.
Well, this kind of came up organically, but I feel like it's a good time for this confession, which was that I kind of detest that feeling of like, well, I can't post something that I did that's bad because that like kind of waters down my presence, right? But then you want to do bad things because it's like you want to experiment or be free, right? So like one of my solutions for that is that like I'll create new accounts and then just try stuff and then like delete them. Like I kind of shudder to think that like some people like that would sound insane to them or like callow, but like
no, I was actually going to ask you. I mean, in the IT space where I work in software development, I mean, we literally have sandboxes of environments that we call a sandbox that allows people to develop and do work that may never see the light of day as a safe place so that you're not mudding up the production environment. I mean, we call it the dev environment from the developers, or from my end where we're in data science, we just call it a sandbox where we need space to be able to do things and experiment that isn't going to cause risk to things that are in production or cause some type of damage one way or the other. So I think you're totally, that's like a very natural solution to the problem that you're facing, honestly. And I think I had considered asking you if you had some type of sandbox for the double primer account in some way or the other.
I do work that part of it is that I wanted to make it appealing, visually appealing, right? Let's call it beautiful. So to kind of reject that tendency or that dependence, I was doing this work that was just drawn and so it had the sort of roughness to it as part of it. And then so basically, there's like a mythological character from the Philippines called the Manananggal, which most people have never heard of, right? It's like a pretty obscure concept. It's basically kind of like a vampire that can shape change and that they kind of harass pregnant women. So there's a lot going on there, right? And then on top of that, like the way you stop them is that they detach from their like halfway at the waist, and then that top part flies off and attacks people. And if you can put ashes on their bottom half, they can't come back to it. That's how you defeat them. That's like the stake through the heart. So my mom would tell me these kind of like bedtime stories, and as a kid, and as the only like cultural touchstone to I had something beyond the white world around me. And so it kind of felt meaningful in some way. But I had completely divorced from anyone else even knowing these stories, right? So it's like there's something there, and it's scary. And then also, I don't know if you've ever had this experience with your family, but something maybe was lost in translation, and like my mom would tell me these stories, and they felt as equally real to when she would like describe like the capital city. Like it wasn't like, it would be, imagine someone telling you there's giraffes that have really long necks and there's unicorns that's like a horse with a horn. It's like, and they never make the distinction of bothering to tell you that giraffes are real and unicorns are not real. So like any story I've had about the Philippines also included mythology that was told in equal seriousness. So I did this project where I would draw women, and then I would burn the drawing, and then I would use the ashes to draw the next drawing. Like I would like make a kind of ink out of the ashes, like using oil. And it was just something that like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I want to do something that's different from everything else I do, that's divorced from everything else. And it didn't really lead anywhere, and it was like weird, and I got to the point where it's like, okay, I tried this, and it didn't awake anything beyond what it is, so I'm just gonna scrap it. But it was just like this like futile gesture to like try something different, you know, like maybe call it an artistic midlife crisis.
Just explore an idea concept, right?
Mm-hmm. And to take it back to what you said about like having a sandbox, I think what like the most interesting thing that can happen as a sandbox is for someone to be able to say like, you won't believe how crazy this crash was, right? That it's like we had a recursive loop where it kept on feeding itself into itself, and it got to be like 1,000 folders deep or something. That it's like the only interesting thing that could happen in the sandbox is not that like it worked, it's how bad it didn't work, right? So that you could learn from it. Is that too romantic?
No, I think in terms of like storytelling, yeah. I mean, I guess professionally, like we use the sandbox as a place to develop with the goal of, I mean, we're experimenting on it, but the goal is to get something that gets to some level of maturity that you're able to then port it over or copy it and promote it to go into production, right? And it's a great environment, so
sure.
they're not spending money on a sandbox for us to have fun. For something to crash spectacularly would be a fun thing to happen in fun storytelling, right, over beers. But that's definitely not the goal.
Do you have inspiration that kind of ties into this kind of stuff, or is it totally different?
The inspiration goes back to I was tying it back to the what's trending, so let me pull my notes back up. So getting back into fonts a little bit, and just bring another inspiration from Instagram. I guess these days right now I draw a lot of my inspiration from Instagram, or it's kind of my little window into a world of creativity that I don't normally experience kind of day to day in a corporate world. There's a couple of accounts where they're doing like very decorative font making, and it didn't even occur to me until just this weekend of like someone described as Victorian fonts, which that wasn't a concept that I was conscious of before, and ties back into a suggestion you sent to me offline last week about some ideas for fonts for my artisan climbing and a logo, to get a more tangible logo going for this project than what I have right now, which is kind of a very first draft, right? I even just used the font that I'm using for artisan climbing was just like a Courier font, right? Just very generic typewriter kind of font. So you sent me a document, which I really appreciate, and I want to use this as the opportunity to talk about it and apologize a little bit for not even acknowledging that I got it. Because I don't know how you might have felt about, like, dude, you didn't even say anything. Like, what's up with that? But no, I definitely got it. I will say I didn't particularly like the suggestions you made, but I was afraid to respond because I didn't want to respond negatively because I'm currently at the stage where, like, I don't know what I really want. So even seeing something that I don't like is actually very productive, right? So a lot of times you got to go through things you know what you don't like to be able to start to tease out what it is I'm thinking about subconsciously. And so I wasn't quite sure how to respond with that because I didn't have anything to be like, well, I'm thinking more of something like this. I didn't have that when you first sent it. But as I saw these accounts over the weekend, I was like, I think not to this extreme level of Victorian decorative elaborate font, but something along those lines or something that elicits the concept of artisan, which I don't even really know what that actually means or what that looks like yet. So the one inspiration, which I think is one, an account I shared with you offline a couple weeks ago, this Polish graphic designer named Tomasz Biernat, who does very elaborate decorative, flourished lettering for, it looks like a lot of it's commercial work for stores or products, and I'm seeing them as tattoos, right? And I never thought of it as Victorian, but now that I've seen that label, I'm like, yeah, I guess it kind of has that Victorian kind of steampunk look about it a little bit. So that's my inspiration this week is Tomasz Biernat, and we'll definitely highlight that in the show notes. So I'd like for my artisan climbing to kind of go in that direction, but I think his is a little too ornate. But then kind of, I guess because I follow this guy, the algorithms are always trying to recommend things you might like. So it recommended another artist this time, same thing through Instagram, named, well, I don't know what his name is. His handle is Nevesman, Nevesman. And this guy is Portuguese, and he, the thing that got recommended to me was an Instagram post he did on how to create vintage-inspired packaging illustrations. And he's got a little eyedropper that looks like something from, 19th century, early 19th century, packaging of drugs and medicines, right? Back then it was all, I guess, over-the-counter medications had all sorts of cocaine and codeine and other drugs in it. It's just kind of got that look to it. But he apparently wrote a blog post with a little tutorial on how to do this style, right? The 19th century, turn of the century type of graphic design, which again, now like these two give me two different references to be like, this is kind of what I think I'd like to go in the direction of for the artisan climbing. I mean, I'm not totally wedded to it, so we could noodle on that a little, but I was thinking that could also lead into like, okay, what did we fix this week? The theme that we've got, and maybe we talk about how do we get to fixing the artisan climbing logo itself, and whether it's, I'd be curious to think of, if you see these references or this Victorian elaborate, ornate graphic design, that's something you just sort of maybe might roll your eyes about, or is it quiche or kitsch as you described?
No, I think it's a great choice because especially aligning yourself with that aspect of bespoke and handmade, that the purpose of slick Web 2.0 logos are the point of those is that they are for mass production, they're for websites. Since this is a physical object, and since it's because it's supposed to be one of a kind, I think it really thematically fits well. And it's funny that you mentioned that you had this secret closet love affair with calligraphy because it's like, is that something that like you have zero interest in, like you yourself physically getting out the quill pen, or because you always have that aspect that it's like, well, this is your company so far, at least. So like, if you just took your quill pen and you write artisan climbing and just left it at that, would that have like a sort of simplicity to it, like John Hancock, that
Maybe.
It's just like...
That's something I might have to try. So I definitely didn't keep up with practicing the calligraphy, so I don't have like a good steady hand for it. So I'd have to just try a couple times and see what that looks like and see if it's got some merit to it or not. That's not a bad idea. I was thinking of something a little more innate that was something beyond what I could personally generate myself. It really gets more into even, I don't know what the right, some level looking a little bit generic or very much within that style that you might just see. Because even, like, I struggle a little bit with the idea of like artisan is very much has a hipster connotation, and even, I think I saw some blog post a while back, sort of stumbled across it, that, you know, hey, can we put these terms to rest in 2016, like as if even a few years, right? Like these are buzzwords that need to die, sort of top 10 list sort of thing. And one of them that was in there was the word artisan, right? That it had been co-opted by so many companies that it lost its meaning. And sure, there are artisan products and companies out there doing it, but a lot of the things now you see with that label are they're being mass produced for totally profit driven organizations, not true to the meaning of the word. So that's caught my mind a little bit. I'm like, well, whatever, right? That was one opinion a few years ago, and this is something that's very unique, at least in this space, and we are doing it by hand. I'm doing it by hand. Even if I'm using electronic digital tools, there's still a lot of hand bespokeness to it, right? Uniqueness to it. That was cool because I had kind of forgotten about the need to kind of continue developing that piece out, right? It's kind of the branding aspect. Because I think you did also write in a couple places, like as you wrote a little bit of a lead into these ideas that the market, because I am trying to sell these in the market of rock climbers, they're like a little bit tribal. There's like affinity to brands and stickers, right, on your car or whatever, that I need to kind of tap into that to increase the chances of success, for sure. And those are all legit observations, absolutely.
We're bouncing back and forth on so many things. I was kind of curious, did you happen to kind of think about what you wanted to kind of work on for the May the 4th show?
Yeah, that's my problem. Yeah, I have too many different ideas, and then I was a little disappointed in that the call for artists that Jessie put together with her, her running rules was that you can only submit 4 things. And I guess so I don't have any experience submitting for art shows. This will be my first time. But I think the references, this is a curated show, which means you got to submit some things and then they got to decide whether they want to accept it or not. Is that
like the curation comes in for like, is it objectionable to children? Like that's the biggest
concern,
but
I was thinking,
I think.
There's part of me is like, I could submit 10 things. And it's like, 4. Mm-hmm. Now I got to think about like which 4. Well, how do I want to narrow it down to get to 4 items? And maybe you're right. Kind of already knowing Jessie and kind of collaborating with her to kind of co-sponsor this event, she's probably not going to hold hard and fast to like only 4 if I showed up with like 6 items, right?
Right. Especially because like if you have 6 items but they're all 12 by 12 inches, that's still less wall space than 4 big portraits. Actually, right? So the one I'll kind of brief a little bit, and I'm kind of starting to run out of time, but what I really want to do is a conceptual project that's like the leftover material from the back of a CNC machine is called the Spoilboard, which is like a sacrificial piece of wood that accidentally gets carved while you're doing your carving operations. And
it leaves some kind of cool patterns if you catch it right at the right time. It can get kind of overwhelmingly destroyed as you're using the machine over time. But yeah, I think at one time posted a pic on Instagram. It was like, wow, this Spoilboard right now looks like abstract art. This is so cool. And this was on the Maslow CNC. So a friend of mine responded like, you could call it Memories of Maslow. I was like, yes, like that's so cool. Like I want to do that. And then what I want to do is paint it, and the original one that's in my mind ties back to I think Kandinsky's his name. It was a piece of art that I saw at the Guggenheim, which I've only been to the Guggenheim like twice, or maybe even just once. It's been in so many movies. Like, oh my God, I've been there once or twice. But anyways, they had a Kandinsky display, and one of his paintings, Circles, or actually later discovered it's actually really popular, was like, oh, this kind of like, I think I could paint it in that style, and it would be really cool. So that's what I really want to do. Sort of the challenges that I'm facing now is like that piece of Spoilboard that I had that original inspiration has been further degraded, right? So I don't know if I'll be able to sort of salvage that one. The Spoilboard was a 4x8 sheet of MDF wood, so that's way too big to do anything with. Originally I was going to cut that into some smaller size, which I hadn't fully decided, but like 2x3 or something. So you might get eight segments of that out, right? And try to paint those, and hopefully all 8 would work together, but maybe not. Again, there's like a lot of like mechanics involved to make that work. Similarly, one of our members at the space, Randy, not getting into too much detail, like CNC'd out of fiberglass the Voltron sword from the cartoon and cut channels in it so they could actually pump gas and make it flaming. He like made a giant flaming sword with actual flames and natural gas or butane or whatever. And the leftover piece of that to me was like, oh, this would be a really cool, like make it some kind of like shadow box kind of thing, right? Where I also wanted to submit that, but that's like a 5 foot or 4 or 5 foot long piece that I want to basically fabricate a stand for, so it casts a shadow accordingly. That's sitting there waiting for me. Is like, that was another idea I thought would be a cool one for the show at the art station. And then Mike, I guess Mike's brother isn't a professional artist and graphic designer, so he's got a little bit of an affinity for it, or we've, like me and the space and you, have kind of reawakened some interest, where I think he always thought art maybe is a curiosity. He's like the more serious brother, and his brother was the artistic one. But so Mike's got this idea for taking junk out of the space and having people contribute as a project for the art show. But he sort of wants my help to help lead making it happen, right? Because I told him I think people will be excited about this and won't actually follow through, right? Or there's that very big risk that we end up with nothing, so we have to be prepared to at least make our own. So even if no one else participated, we would have something to go ahead and show for it. It's just, they're still a little too half-baked, right? And now as time's moving closer, it's like, wow, there's sort of a lot of effort needed to make these things happen. Those are all the things that are kind of still swimming through those ideas as we're getting near to the show to submit something.
I really would like to encourage you to pursue the Spoilboard thing, because I see that as being really juicy, like conceptually. So, like, there's the concept of postmodernity, which is like a really bottomless pit, right? But like one of the more promising aspects of it is that something you could point at and be like, that feels postmodern, is the void, right? So like if someone takes a picture of a movie theater after it burned down, that's kind of like really a postmodern idea to me. And so like having this Spoilboard, which is like the residue of the creation, is just such a fun, juicy idea. And there's also that thing of like, if it looks bad, that's almost better. That it's like, what's that junk? And then you read the title and you're like, oh wow, that's like, there's this twist. I would even say, like, you wouldn't even need to paint it per se unless the painting, like, helps reveal all the rivulets.
Yeah.
And
That's exactly the intent.
The stuff.
Was the paintings. Yeah. And then I can choose which parts to highlight and which parts to obscure, right? I'll have some ability to do some of like pull out whatever it is that I see.
And I would even go one step farther and say, you said, well, the board's gotten chewed up more. I would almost say you could have a goal in mind where, let's say, you pick 5 different images. One is an angel, one is a baseball, one is whatever, and then like the purpose is not the object; it's that the accidental cut into the spoil board of those 4 objects makes a new 4th object or 5th object. So, like, say you cut a Voltron sword, the wings of a character from like Neverending Story, whatever 4 things you like, and then so you have the positive object, so you have those 4 objects, and then like the 5th object is whatever those 4 objects left behind, and you could even cheat it by like making it cut a little deeper than it really needs to.
Yeah, we can definitely explore that. And it's sort of there's a certain amount of being intentional with what's going on there, which we'll have to look into that and see if we can make that work. That's actually a pretty cool idea. My original idea was just there's that element of randomness, right? There's some random behind from various different people doing whatever they're interested in, and then I'm able to essentially harvest some of what they've done in this different way, right? But another idea, I think, this is where, like you said, it's juicy, right? There's a lot of different ways you could go. Then you could even have 2 parallel tracks, right? This is what some spoil board looks like when there's been some intentional, work done or along a particular theme or something that ties these things together. And then here's the other parallel track of the randomness that comes from a community, right? Of users and enthusiasts. That would be cool. So it really just comes down to a lot of time, like just make time and focus to pull that off, right? Yeah, it was funny. There was this guy in Gwinnett somewhere who's got an Instagram channel, or I guess he's got YouTube channels is a big thing, but he'll cross post to Instagram, where he posted something about his spoil board, and again, I like the pattern. And he's talking about having to replace. He's like, I think it's just time to replace this. So I reached out to him. I was like, dude, can I have that spoil board for a project? And he was like, that's weird. And then I was like, he's like, well, it costs, I got to get a new one. And he's like the grumpy carpenter sort of response. And then I was like, well, I'll buy it off you, or I'll buy you a new spoil board in exchange, right? But like he still like thought, he just didn't bite. He just was like, what? Like, you're weird, and that's weird. Like, I don't even want to, entertain that. Now he's got to figure out how to do the transaction, essentially, right? Of the whole thing, which was kind of funny. I kind of chuckled at that, and I was like, yeah, okay, I guess I don't blame you.
I commend you for trying, because that is the response, that it's like, people are like, what? What are you talking about? You know what I find is a good trick? Tell them that you or your son is a grad student and they need it for a project. That is, within our capitalist system, it's like that cuts through a lot of like anxiety for some reason.
That's funny.
They're like, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah.
It's easy to explain it to themselves and to other people, right? And it's just a cold call, like, I don't know, wants to do some kind of art project with it? I don't know, whatever, Cool.
Well, we're going to include that Instagram Victorian artist in our show notes, and I'll include a link to my Lego Batman.
Oh, you got to definitely include, whatever that Filipino monster.
Oh, yeah.
What was it? What was the name of that?
Manananggal. Yeah.
It's going to take me a while to learn that one. Yeah, that would be cool. I'm curious to see what that looks like.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, and we'll talk again next week.
Looking forward to it.
Find more information at doubleprimer.com.